daughter Elsa beside me, who's very eager and keen to learn about salsa making as well. So this event tonight is a partnership between EOS Eco Energy and Open Sky. And so Mary and Mara are there at Open Sky in the kitchen. So I just want to let everybody know the kind of background and why EOS is putting on this workshop. We have funding from the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund to put on a series of food preservation workshops and also to do a lot of other activities around building resilience towards climate change. So building self-sufficiency skills, improving our self-reliance in our region here and across the Maritimes, because I have a feeling we've got people listening in this evening from across the Maritimes, which is really fun. But so EOS is really focused on helping our communities, our residents in our region here in Southeast New Brunswick to reduce and adapt to climate change. So we're really focused on helping people adapt to climate change, build resiliency. And so a big part of that is how we can keep our families safe and fed and do things in a more sustainable way as well. So canning and food preservation and the things we'll learn tonight have so many benefits for so many good reasons. I also want to mention some COVID-related issues. I want to let everybody know that and especially for those who just joined recently, since I started talking here, that Mara is Mary's daughter, and so that's why they're able to work closely together safely, and they're not going to have masks on. It will be easier to hear Mary for sure this evening, and we'll keep them cooler in the hot kitchen too. But the staff at Open Sky who are around them behind the scenes, they've got their masks on and are following all the COVID safety precautions that are needed this evening and always at Open Sky. And I will hand it over to Mary.
Thanks, Amanda. Welcome to the Open Sky Kitchen. I'm with my daughter Mara, as Amanda said. And for those of you not familiar with Open Sky, this is an organic farm here in Sackville where we provide life skills and independent living skills for people experiencing disabilities and mental health challenges. So it's a really wonderful place to be, and it's a nice kitchen to be working in, so we're happy to be back. I know there's some people who are returning this week who were here last week for the pickle workshop. Today we're going to go over the ingredients and the equipment that we'll use for hot water canning, and we'll go through some techniques for cutting and preparing your things. My background in cooking, I went to cooking school many years ago, and my daughter and I have a small catering company, so we like to cook a lot. As I mentioned last week, my grandmother used to can a lot, and it was a very intimidating process that seemed to take over the entire kitchen for many days, buckets and bushels of produce, and it never seemed very appealing to me. It's much easier and less intimidating to work on smaller batches. So that's what we're going to do. So once you get used to doing a few small jars, like a few batches of 7 to 8 jars, it's really easy to start doing it, and you don't have to think about spending your whole day in the kitchen. So it becomes a much more manageable process. I'm just going to. So we're talking about a process called water bath canning. So we've got this large pot over here, and that's our water bath. So water bath canning is used for high acid foods. So last week we did pickles, and they have a lot of vinegar, which is highly acidic. Today we're doing salsa. So in salsa, it's important to have the acidity added to the tomatoes. This type of food preservation method is only suitable for high acid foods. You can't use this method for preserving non-pickled vegetables, meat or fish or anything like that. It's not safe for that type of preservation. You need pressure canning, and that's a different process. So today we're just looking at salsa, which is another high acid food that's suitable for water bath canning. So in this method, the filled jars are placed in boiling water for 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes. Today's recipe, it'll be a bit longer, and I'll explain why as we go through. So the heat is important. It's enough time to allow the heat to penetrate through the jar and create enough heat within the jar to kill any bacteria. It also helps create a vacuum seal. So once you've canned your food successfully, there's a vacuum seal, and that prevents any kind of breakdown from air entering the jar. So that's what enables you to keep it on the shelf for up to a year after you've processed it. So those two things are really important. And the acidity is key, because one of the problems that can happen with canned goods is botulism. So botulism is, the bacteria that creates botulism is all over the place. It's in the environment. And it grows in an anaerobic environment, so a vacuum. But it doesn't like acid. So maintaining the proper acidity is really important. So especially when you're canning. So we will be talking again about that as we go through. So we're going to go through the ingredient. Yeah, we've just got a question about substituting ingredients. And I'm going to go through the ingredients after I look at the equipment. And absolutely, we'll talk about things you can substitute. So generally, herbs and spices you can substitute without any problem in your recipe. You can add more onion, less garlic, that type of thing. There's lots of scope for flexibility, as long as you're maintaining the right balance with the acid. So we'll talk about that when we're going through the ingredients. That's a very good question. And not everyone's a fan of cilantro. This recipe has cilantro in it. So if it's not your thing, you can absolutely use parsley instead. So to go over the ingredients again, some of you will remember this from last week, and for some of you it might be new information. We've got this large water bath canner, which is basically a fairly lightweight metal pot. And the reason it's lighter weight is because it gets really heavy when it's filled with water. So a stainless steel one like this is very hard to carry if it's filled with water. This one we actually filled from the kettle, which is a more energy efficient way of heating your water. Bringing such a large pot of water to boil on the stove isn't the most energy efficient way, so you can save some energy by using your kettles and filling it from the kettle, bringing it to a boil in the kettle and then filling it. So the other things you'll need, obviously, are your jars. So these are mason jars. There's different brands, but what makes a mason jar is that it's specifically designed for changes in temperature. So this can undergo repeated changes in temperature from boiling to out of the boiling water without breaking, or without as much chance of it breaking. So these are really sturdy jars. Jam jars from the store, when reusing jam jars is not a safe practice. They break much more easily. They're not designed for repeated usage like these. You always want to check your mason jars to make sure there's no cracks or nicks on the edge. If there's a little chip out of the jar, you shouldn't use that one for canning. You can use it for other things. There's lots of uses for mason jars, but any chips in the rim can prevent a proper vacuum seal. So that's important. Look at that. The other ingredients are the lids and the rings. So Mira's just going to open up one of those for me. Thank you very much. So these are the lids that you use on your jars to create the vacuum seal. You can see they've got a little bit of rubber on the rubber or some kind of substance. I always call it rubber, and that sticks once it gets heated up in the water. And the ring is to hold it on to your jar. Unfortunately, these aren't really reusable. So for a proper seal, you really shouldn't use a new jar each time, a new lid each time. And if you can a lot, that means you will end up with a lot of these that you can't use again for canning. But you can use them for other things. You can use them if you're using your mason jars for storage, they're fine for that, but not for canning. You can find these on sale. Sometimes you can buy them in bulk, sometimes online. You can get them at the dollar store, sometimes for $2 a box, usually in a box of 12. There is a reusable brand from a company called Tattler, Tattler, and that's a two-piece. It has a little rubber gasket and a lid, and you can reuse those multiple times. I don't have those now, but it's something I want to get in the future. A couple things that are really handy to have in the kitchen are tongs for lifting out your jars from the water. When I first started canning, I didn't have these, and this will absolutely make the job much more pleasant and much less dangerous. So you don't want to be trying to lift out jars of hot jars from hot water with kitchen tongs. You do run the risk of scalding yourself. So these are really, I consider, an essential tool. A funnel, it's just a funnel that fits exactly into your jar. So it makes filling the jars much easier and quicker. It's not absolutely necessary, but it certainly makes it more pleasant, and you'll want to can more often if it's easier. There's a couple other tools that aren't really critical, but they're very helpful to have. And one of these is a little magnet wand. And it really isn't essential, but it is kind of useful sometimes. So you can just pick up your lids with the wand, and I'll explain a bit later what we're going to do with the lids and why that might be a useful thing. But it's not essential, but if you have kids in the kitchen with you, that's often something they might like to do, is help pick up the goods. The other tool that comes with most with canning sets that you buy in the store is a kind of ruler. So this is a multi-purpose tool, actually. You can use this to run around the edges of your jars to make sure there's no air bubbles. And it's also something that you can use to measure the head space, or the amount of space between the product and the top of your jar. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we're putting our salsa in the jars. But the head space is really important because it's something that helps with the forming of the vacuum in the jar. So different types of products have different types of headroom. So jams and things need less room at the top, and some other items need more. So when you're looking at your recipe, that's something you need to pay attention to. And if it's a little bit off, that's fine. But if there's a big difference, you might notice your jars don't seal. So you might have some products that don't seal. So it's just something to be aware of when you're canning. And this, as I say, this comes, if you go to Canadian Tire or Walmart or different stores, you can find a canning set that usually has the tongs, the funnel, the little wand, the magnetic wand, and the ruler. So I'm just going to put those away. And this is boiling away here. I'm just going to ask Mare to turn down the salsa a little bit. We've got it boiling in the background. Because the salsa boils for a little bit longer than the pickles that we made, we did start cooking our salsa earlier. So I'm going to go through the ingredients with you, but then our salsa is actually cooking, because otherwise we'd have to sit here for a long time while the salsa simmered. So we're going to start with tomatoes. So tomatoes are the basis of a lot of salsas. And really, there's kind of two basic types of tomatoes. We've got your Roma, or your paste tomatoes, and I call them slicing tomatoes. So, and you can see the difference in shape between these two tomatoes. One is kind of elongated. It's kind of, sometimes they're almost a pear shape, and the others are quite round usually. And the paste tomatoes are something like Roma tomatoes are a really common one, or Amish paste. There's different varieties, but the difference between the two, I'm just going to cut these. Oh, that's such a lovely tomato. These are all tomatoes from Open Sky, and they're just lovely. So if you can see the difference between these two on the inside, one of them doesn't have a lot of seeds. So the paste tomato, if I squeeze it like that, there's not a lot of seeds coming out of that. If I squeeze the other one, you can see there's quite a bit of difference. So when you're canning or you're making sauces, a lot of people like to use the Roma tomatoes. So you don't have to think about seeds and things. There's not that many, and you can just chop them up as they are. With these ones, sometimes you might want to remove some of the seeds before you finish chopping your product. And you can do that just by cutting it and squeezing it. But for salsa, you might want to peel your tomatoes. It's not absolutely necessary. Some people like to do it, some people don't. I sometimes do it, I don't always do it. But I'm going to just show you how to peel your tomatoes. So it works best when you've got really nice ripe tomatoes. This Roma tomatoes could probably be a little bit riper, but this one's nice and juicy, so we'll try it with that. Maybe I'll use a smaller one, so you don't want to. All right, so the first thing you do is on the stem end, you just take your paring knife, And you just cut out that little core. So you stick your knife in and just kind of move the tomato around your knife and just get out the core. And if you have a sharp knife, it helps. So you've just removed that. It's not much, just a little bit of the tomato. And then at the very bottom of your tomato, you cut a little X. And that's it. And with the bigger tomatoes, the same thing. You just cut out that core part, the stem end, sorry, and then cut a little X in the bottom of your tomato. Okay, we've got some boiling water here. So we're going to take our prepared tomatoes and we're going to drop them in the boiling water. I'm going to use a spoon so I don't scald myself. And we're going to leave them in there for maybe 15 seconds. And I'm going to get Mara to grab me the bowl of ice water that we prepared ahead of time. So we've got some ice water, or very cold water. If you don't have ice on hand, it's okay. But it helps to have the water as cold as possible. We're giving these a few seconds. How long they need depends a little bit on the ripeness of the tomatoes. So if they're really ripe, you don't have to leave them in for very long at all. But you don't want them to get soft or mushy or anything. So I'm going to take that tomato and just drop it straight into the ice water. And we're going to leave those in there for a second. And what I'm seeing here is the skin starts to split off automatically. So if you can see that, the skin will just peel away just like that. So it's much easier than trying to... Now, this one was not quite as ripe, so it's a little bit harder, but you can see this, it's much easier to peel this way. And these are still firm, they haven't been mushed. So I've got 2 peeled tomatoes and it's a pretty quick way to do it. So once I've got these peeled, then if I decide I want to squeeze out some of the seeds so I don't have quite so much tomato liquid, I can just give that a squeeze. And I probably should have done that into a bowl so that my cutting board would be cleaner. So can you get me a cutting board? There it is, right over there. I'm just going to grab another cutting board because I've made a big mess here. Oh no, this one here. And under my cutting board, I have a damp cloth. That'll helps keep your cutting board from slipping around. So it's always something helpful. Just have a damp cloth underneath your cutting board. So those are some tomato tricks. Once you've got your tomatoes, I'm just going to grab, sorry. No, that's okay. Once you've got your tomatoes peeled, and you're going to chop them, for this recipe, they just need to be coarsely chopped. So they don't have to be super finely chopped. But I've squeezed out some of the seeds from this one. So cut them in half and hold your knife so that your finger is kind of at the end of your knife. You don't want to hold it like this. You want to grab it at the end. I've got something stuck to my... And just chop. Having a sharp knife is really helpful because if you're doing a lot of canning and a lot of chopping, you can get blisters on your hands. So just sharp knives are always good. That's your probably most important kitchen tool is a sharp knife. All right, so we've got for this particular recipe, we want 7 cups of chopped tomatoes. So you can decide, again, if you want to peel them or not. All right, so our next ingredient that we're going to look at are peppers. And this recipe calls for jalapenos and sweet peppers. So this is a type of sweet pepper that looks a little bit like a hot pepper, but it's a sweet pepper. And this is a jalapeno, which is a hot pepper. So the difference between your hot and your sweet peppers is capsaicin. So that's the chemical in peppers that gives it the heat. And sweet peppers have almost none, and hot peppers have different ranges. So jalapenos in the scale of pepper heat is considered a milder pepper. So there's something called the Scoville scale, which is used to measure the heat level of different types of peppers. It's not a super precise measurement, but it's basically the amount of drops of water it takes to help, the amount of drops of water that enable the pepper taste, the capsaicin to disappear for tasters. So again, it's not super precise, but it is a gauge. So the Scoville rating for this pepper, the sweet pepper, is 0. For pepper spray, the rating would be, just to give you an idea, would be 5 million units on the Scoville scale. The hottest pepper is called a ghost pepper, and it's one of those ones you might see on YouTube where someone tastes it and it's kind of a dare and it's just ridiculously hot. That's 1 million Scovilles. I don't really think anybody cooks with those. It's too much heat. Jalapeno has about 250 to 2,500 to 8,000 Scovilles. So that puts it in on the milder end. Again, it depends. It's a lot of preference, what people like, what they don't like, how much heat they can handle. I personally am very sensitive to peppers when I'm cutting them. So I have some gloves here. Even the milder peppers really make my hands, I can really feel it. So generally, if you have gloves on hand, you can use gloves to chop your peppers. You don't have, there's some tricks you can do to prevent the heat. So a couple of things about peppers. We're going to cut off the little end here. My knife's nice, and I'm going to cut it in half. And you can see you've got a core here and lots of seeds. You'll probably read online that you should remove the seeds because the seeds hold all the heat. And that's not really true. So the seeds actually don't have the capsaicin in them, but where you have it is in this central, the thing that the seeds are attached to. So sometimes the seeds can have a little bit of heat because some of the flesh from the pepper is still there. So you can keep your pepper seeds in your salsa if you want them. It's not going to add to the heat. But I just don't like them, so I'm going to remove them with my paring knife and just kind of loosen up that center part and cut out the ribs and then just get rid of most of them. So again, I'm just kind of cutting like that, and it comes out really easily, all that center part, and you can just use your fingers. So a few seeds is not going to hurt anything, but you can just tap your pepper and get rid of them. All right, so to reduce the amount of heat chemical on your hands, you can turn your peppers upside down, and just, if your knife's really sharp, you'll be able to chop through just like that. And generally, you can chop it as large or as fine as you want. So just, and always keeping your fingers curled in, so you don't want your fingers out. So keep your fingers curled in so that you're less chance of cutting your fingers. However, with gloves, sometimes it's a little bit tricky because they want to get caught underneath the, so we'll just chop those up. So again, how much pepper you use depends on your taste and what type of pepper. You can substitute a hotter pepper for the jalapenos. If you're not sure, you might want to start with milder and then build up. It all depends on your tastes. But this recipe, I think, calls for 8 jalapeno peppers. So that would be a fairly, I don't know, that I would be comfortable with that. Probably my mom wouldn't. So if you really find you don't enjoy hot things, you can try it with 6 or even half the amount of jalapeno peppers. So I'm going to move my peppers over. An onion, a coarsely chopped onion. I'm just going to show you a little trick. Some of you might know it already, but this is what they teach you. One of the first things you learn in cooking school is how to chop an onion. So we're going to cut off this end. And I'm going to cut the onion in half from the stem side, like this. Okay, and I'm going to take the peel. I'm going to take off my gloves. Question? All right, sorry, I'm going to give those to Mara. So spoiled having someone in the kitchen that I can give my gloves to. So I'm just going to peel this like this. Now I've got kind of a little handle I can hold on to. I've got the peel. And I'm going to make a series of cuts just across. So these just need to be coarsely chopped. So that means they don't need to be such big pieces. So I'm going to make slits in the onion about, I don't know, maybe half an inch. And I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to go through the center like that. And I'm not going to cut all the way through. And then all I need to do is go like this, and I've got my onion all chopped up. And If you're doing a lot of onions, this can be a faster way of doing it. It's not absolutely essential, but it's just a good trick to know. So, yeah, no, I think I'm okay. The next thing we're going to look at are chopping a sweet pepper. So again, because if you want to have uniform pieces, it may not be something that's important to you, but if it is, you're just going to cut off the top. Do you have? Okay. Okay. We've got our Open Sky chickens joining in today, and they're out back squawking a lot. On this pepper, I've just cut off the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to just kind of run my knife not all the way through so I can open it up a little bit. And then I'm going to take out the seeds. And I'm going to take out the ribs. I'm just going to use my knife to get out those ribby bits because they're not so nice on sweet peppers. It's easier sometimes with the big, thick bell peppers that you can get. This one's quite a thin pepper. And then I can just slice that into fairly regular sizes. I can get more uniform sizes if I do it this way. And the little end bits, we can just chop off the green bits from those. But then this just gives me more uniform sizes, which isn't the most important thing in the world, but it looks nice. So that just helps you get slightly more uniform sizes. The last thing we're going to really look at here is the cilantro. It's one of those love it or hate it herbs, right? I love it. There's some people there's believed to have some genes that for some reason create a different reaction to the taste or the chemicals in cilantro. So they get a different reaction to the taste, and that's why some people can have such a strong reaction to cilantro. The other reason is sometimes people just use way too much of it in their cooking. So it has a very distinctive taste. You don't want to overuse it. If you can taste just cilantro, there's too much, right? So cilantro, unlike parsley, you can include the stems when you're chopping. So I'm going to with parsley, you usually try to cut off those end stems, but with cilantro, you can use those. Oh, I love that smell. That smells really good. And just kind of bunch it up with your hand and just roughly chop it. It doesn't have to be really finely chopped. If you can just go to the end of your stalk, you can include those. I'm not going to do it right now just for time. And then if you want it to make it smaller, you can just hold your knife like this and run it across the parsley a few times. And that'll just chop it up more finely for you. So an herb like this cilantro is the greens, so the stems and the leaves of aromatic plants. So rosemary, parsley, thyme. A spice are the seeds or the roots or the stems or the bark of plants. So cilantro is an interesting one because it's very common as an herb, but also as a spice. So coriander are the seeds of the cilantro plant, and those are often ground for a spice. And that's one that I use a lot in my cooking for savory and sweet things. You'll often see cilantro referred to as fresh coriander. And you can also have dried coriander herb. But the coriander spice, the seeds, are also really good. And you can add that to your salsa too if you want. Yeah, and there's garlic in this recipe too.
A new cutting board?
Yeah, I think I need a new cutting board. Thanks, Mayor. It's nice having an assistant in the kitchen. Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to just move that one over to the way. Thank you. Don't worry, we're not going to waste all this food. We're going to use it. And it's garlic time. There's some beautiful garlic at the markets. We've got lots of beautiful garlic here at Open Sky, and this is a nicely cured head of garlic from this year's garlic crop. When you buy them in the store with this when you buy them at the market usually with this hard neck, it can be a little bit tricky sometimes to get the bulbs out. So what you want to do is just kind of work that out. You can see it breaks a little bit. And if you push on it, sometimes. It's very fresh, so it's you can kind of create a little bit of space there, and you can pry it apart. You often see people slamming their garlic with their knife. I don't like to slam food. It's food. You don't want to bruise it, so you can press with your knife gently. Again, this is very fresh, so it won't peel as easily. Cut off the little hard bit at where it attached to this. And when it's really fresh, it's harder to peel. But when you press on it, it kind of helps loosen up the skin a little bit. With garlic that's been stored for a while, that skin will slip right off. And but it smells so good. It's beautiful garlic. This nice hard neck garlic will last really well. Often if you buy garlic at the grocery store that's been imported, it doesn't last at all in the kitchen. The local stuff, if you buy some now, it'll probably, and you store it, it will last all winter. So it's a good stuff. It has great flavor too. All right, so I'm going to move that over there. All right. So maybe it might be a good chance to take a few questions if there's any questions before we can up our salsa that's simmering away there in the back.
We do have a question.
Good, there's a question.
Can you reuse the Classico pasta jars?
Good question. Someone's asking if you can reuse the Classico pasta jars. Some of those are mason jars, and I have some of those that I do use. The ones that you can reuse will fit a standard ring. Yeah, so I should have brought one. And often if they're not suitable for canning, they will say not suitable for canning on them. So in the store, sometimes you can find mason type jars that are used for glasses or different things. Yeah, Michelle has one.
It does say mason right on.
Yeah, so this is an example of a Classico jar. It says Atlas Mason. This is suitable for canning. So this is a great, yeah. So generally you're safe. It's a nice reason to buy these because you can reuse the jars. Yeah, so that was a good question. And
Way to store garlic.
okay, best way to store garlic. The best way to store the imported garlic is not to buy too much of it at once. And then I have a little jar on my counter with holes in it, so it gets a bit of air. It tends to get really soft in the fridge. The imported stuff has to be used fairly quickly. The hard neck garlic, if you keep it in a cool place in your house, it should last well. It doesn't sprout the way that the soft imported garlic will. So just like with a lot of sort of root type vegetables or winter vegetables, a cool space. If you have a room in your basement that has adequate circulation, that works. Some people hang their garlic if they have a spot where they can do that, and that works too. I hope that answers the question. And there's another question here. Okay, suggestion for what to use in place of hot peppers for people who can't tolerate hot peppers. Just omit them. You don't have to use hot peppers. You can use sweet peppers. So if you don't like or can't tolerate jalapenos or any spicy peppers, use the sweet peppers. They don't have that the chemical capsaicin that creates the heat. So usually the large globed ones you see in the store, the nice bright red ones and yellow ones, those are fine. Those are nice sweet peppers, and they won't cause the same issues. Good question. All right, are there any other questions? Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to say? Did we? No? Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Amanda for a while and just get set up for canning the salsa that's been simmering away here.
And so while Mary gets organized, I would love to ask our audience some questions. So feel free to unmute yourself, and we can have a bit of a chat. So first, I'm just wondering where people are listening in from, because I'm betting it's not just Sackville, and so I'm wondering how far and wide we're reaching this evening. And you can either unmute or you can write it in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. Elsa and I here, we're listening in from just outside Sackville. Oh, we've got Joggins represented, and Dorchester, and Oromocto. Hey. Yeah, Oromocto is near Fredericton area. And Fredericton too, Dorchester. Well, it's so nice that, we were supposed to actually be doing this workshop in person at the Open Sky Kitchen. Oh, we've got folks from Nova Scotia, Memramcook, Riverview, French Lake, Lakeville Corner, Ship Harbor, hey, Lower Ship Harbor. And so it's so nice that, even though we're not able to be together because of COVID, that's why we're doing this online instead of in person at Open Sky. And it's really nice so that you guys from across the Maritimes can listen in and can benefit from all of Mary's wisdom and tips. I'm learning new things. Learned a lot of new things at the last workshop too, and I've been doing pickling for so many years. So there's always something new we can learn, and so it's so nice that you guys have been able to join in from all over the place. As much as it would have been nice to be in there helping chop things up. But nice that we can listen in from wherever we are this evening. So just let me know, Mary or Michelle, who's off camera there, when you want to get going. Otherwise, I can ask another question.
Okay, so for this recipe, basically all you need to do, you chop up all your vegetables and you put them in the pot over here with some vinegar. And I'm just going to talk about vinegar again. I mentioned this last week. When you're canning, you need a vinegar that has at least 5% acetic acid in it. So I like to use cider vinegar, apple cider vinegar in my canning, but that has the same level of acetic acid. So it's labeled on the front. You'll always see it when you're using a vinegar for canning. If you don't see that on the label, so if you're getting it from somewhere, I don't know, and you don't know the acidity, you shouldn't use it for canning. So that's an important thing, again, for food safety. But you can use different types of vinegar as long as they have the same acetic acid level. And most of the vinegars you buy in the store will have that. So red wine, white wine vinegars, apple cider vinegars, they should all do that. This recipe also calls for a can of tomato paste that gets added in. That just thickens it up and it intensifies the tomato flavor. The recipe that you have doesn't call for salt. I pretty much always add salt to everything. With this recipe, I might add half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of salt, and I would probably add some fresh pepper too, but they're not in the recipe. So we're going to can up this lovely salsa that's been simmering away here, and it smells really, really good. So it is a really fantastic smell. Thanks, Mir. The recipe that you got said that you need to keep the jars hot before you can them. When you water process canned goods for 10 minutes or longer, you don't need to sterilize your jars. So the reason they're keeping them hot is because they're trying to minimize breakage, so that you don't have a big change in temperature between your hot ingredient and the jar. If these are at room temperature, that shouldn't be a problem. If you had really cold jars that you'd taken out of your car and then you wanted to can with them, that could be a problem. So as long as your jars are clean and they're room temperature, I've never had a problem with jars breaking. So again, it's another little step that you don't have to do that saves time and makes canning more fun, I think. So I've got my ladle here and I've got my funnel. And so I just like to always have a little bowl underneath to prevent it slopping all over things. I like to use the same size ladle each time so I know how many scoops it takes to fill each jar. So this one's a little bit different from my ladle at home, but you figure it out as you go. So you can see these vegetables are nice and chunky looking, and this has simmered for about half an hour. The recipe says it should make about, I think, 5 jars. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of difference. The recipe might say you can make 5 and you might get 7 jars, or you might get 4, but different things can affect that. So this recipe requires, I'm just going to check. I forget how much headroom. We talked about headroom earlier. Is it 1/2 inch? Yeah. Can you pass me my little ruler? So this recipe requires 1/2 inch. So you can use just a clean ruler that you have at home for canning. So I'm just going to measure. So 1/2 inch from the top of my ingredient. So that's about 1/2 inch. So in these jars, you're going to fill basically up to where the lid will be fastened on. So now I can eyeball it for the rest of these. So we're going to fill these up. Oh, where's my little... Oh, it smells so good, the cilantro and the peppers. And the fresh tomatoes really make a difference. But you know, in the winter, if you can't get really fresh tomatoes, you can make salsa with canned tomatoes. So it tastes good too. That one I might need to. All right. So just so this looks pretty good. So stir your product around so that the liquid is evenly distributed. So you don't have one that's full of liquid and one that's full of vegetables. You want it to be fairly evenly distributed between each jar. I have to come up with some jokes to tell when I'm filling jars, right? A song and a dance for filling jars. All right, we're almost done here. Are there any questions? I can answer some questions. Oh, there's a question?
Why wouldn't you use pickling vinegar?
Yeah, pickling vinegar is fine as long as it's at least 5% acetic acid. So someone asked if you can use pickling vinegar. Yes, you can. The main thing is that it has to be at least 5%. In salsa, you might find pickling vinegar to be too strong because when you eat pickles, you're not usually eating the brine so much. You're eating the vegetable that's been in the brine, whereas in salsa, you're eating all of it. So I personally wouldn't use pickling vinegar because I think it would be a little bit strong. But in terms of food safety, it would be absolutely safe. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, all right.
Do you use table salt or coarse salt or kosher salt?
That's another good question. For pickling, you want to use pickling salt because it has no additives, and that can affect the clarity of your brine. But in terms of food safety or taste, well, food safety, it doesn't matter what type of salt you use. For hot water bath canning with acid-based foods, when you're making fermented foods that use salt, that's a whole different matter. So the type of salt and the quantities matter a lot. I like using kosher salt sometimes and regular table salt. Probably with this, I'd probably just use regular table salt because that's what I would have at hand. And most people, when in the finished product, when it's cooked like this, couldn't tell the difference what type of salt you used. It can, when you are using it at the end of cooking, like sometimes people use salt to sprinkle salt on their food, then the type of salt you use can make a big difference. So I'm just going to even out. One of my jars had a little bit too much, so I'm going to add it to this little jar that doesn't seem to have enough there. All right. So I'm going to get Mara to get me a clean cloth, and I'm just going to wipe my labels. So there, we've got this lovely jars of salsa. It smells so good. Can you just give that a damp it for me? Poor Mara. I'm really spoiled having someone able to get me things. Thanks, Mara. Mara actually helps me a lot, and Mara's a really good cook. She makes really great stuff. So. It's true. So I'm just wiping the rims to make sure there's nothing on the rim that could get in the way of the seal. So those are nice and clean. Some people use vinegar. They dip it in vinegar and just, Mara's going to take that out of the way. So we've got our lids. We soak them a little bit in water. Often you'll see old recipes where people said you had to boil the lids, and that's not recommended. So you can soften them up a little bit in water. If you don't do that, it's okay. It'll still work. So we're just going to place the lids over our jars. And I'm going to use my little wand because I just like these things a lot. And we just place them there. Oh, this really does smell good. I am liking this salsa. So you've got that on there. So this made 5 jars for us. Sometimes the yields can be slightly different. It depends on a lot of different factors. One of the key things now that we've got the lids on, we're going to secure them with the rings, but you don't want to put them on too tightly. That's a mistake people make sometimes. If they're too tight, it can prevent the seal from forming properly. So one little way to do it, I'm going to put that off. I shouldn't put this on there, but I'm going to do it just for now. So you put the lid on, you make sure it's on centered, and then just you tighten it until the jar starts to move, and that should be tight enough. You can tighten it just a little bit beyond that, but you don't want it to be really tight. Oh, there's a question here, so I'm going to, Mara's going to, yes. Okay, so someone's asking if you don't have a canning pot, can you use a smaller pot? Yes, absolutely. One thing you need to, you want to think about though is canning pots often come with a little rack that helps keep the jars in place. You just want to make sure that your jars aren't, while the water's boiling, they're not jostling around too much and banging into each other, because sometimes that can lead to cracking. But absolutely, I've canned things with just my regular pots. Yes, you can use smaller jars, so 250 ml jars. Going to smaller size is not usually a problem. Sometimes going to a larger size can be a problem. So mason jars are usually pretty standard sizes. There's 1 liter, 500 mils, and 250 mils. You could do this with 250 ml jars. It's no problem at all. Yeah. Can the lids soak in cold water, or should it be warm? It can be warm, even if it's cold. You don't want it ice cold, but it can be tap cold. That's fine. It's not an absolutely necessary step. I usually use warm water for that, but it just softens them up a little bit. It's not a hugely critical thing. So we've got our jars all ready to go. This recipe, unlike the pickles that we made last week, or 2 weeks ago, this will boil for 20 minutes. So tomato-based, like salsas, tomato sauces, those often boil for 20 minutes, or pickled beets will boil for 20 minutes. That has to do with the acidity level of the various vegetables. So these will be boiling longer. So we're going to bring this over to the stove.
Could you show that rack?
Yes, I am going to do that. This system's a little bit different from the one I have at home. So it has a rack like this, and you can place it like, goes in the water. And right now it's above, just about to stick my hands in there. That was not wise. Okay, I've got my, so that just helps you lift the jars out all at once. I don't usually use it for that. I mostly just use these racks to keep my jars in place. Mine's a little bit different from this, but you don't have to have the rack. It's not absolutely essential. It's just a nice thing. So I've got my jars in there. They look beautiful. And we're just gonna set those to simmer. And the water level should be an inch above the top of your jars. So it needs to be covered with enough water to cover them by an inch in order to get the right temperature. So we're gonna put the lid on there. And once it comes back up to a boil, we'll measure for 20 minutes. And those will simmer for 20 minutes. And once they've done that, we'll turn off the heat, take off the lid, and let them sit for 5 minutes before we take them out of the jar. So that gives them time to decompress a little bit. Okay. Yeah, we're just going to give that a second because it cools down once you take the lid off. So we're just going to give it a couple minutes to come back up to a boil. We've got the timer beeper battle happening. If someone's asking if you're using a small pot, how high do you need the water to be? So the water always needs to cover the jars by an inch in order to get the heat distribution. So if your pot isn't big enough to allow you to cover the jars by an inch of water and not have it boiling out while it's cooking, then you'll need to use a bigger pot. The thing about these, you can often find them at thrift stores for a fairly good price, or at yard sales. It's something that people often are getting rid of. Or you might find it at thrift stores, yard sales, Kijiji. Another good place for jars too is to look on Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace. You can often find these for a really great deal. I got about, I don't know, 10 dozen a couple weeks ago for, I don't know, $40. So there, you can get really good deals. How tight should the rings be before going into the water? Yeah, that's a good question, and we'll go over that again. So I've got my empty jar here, and I've got my lid. So one way to kind of, so once you've got that on straight, sometimes it can take a bit of practice. So I've got that on straight. So when I've tightened it, and you can see the jar starts to move, so I'm going to loosen it again. So once I can tighten it and the jar starts to move, that's the kind of tightness that you need. You don't want to jam it. It should be quite loose. So when I go to untighten it, I can do it really easily. It's not a super tight seal. I hope that answers the question. Something I forgot to do that I should have done is use this end of my measuring tool to kind of just run around the edge of my jar to get rid of any air bubbles. This is a fairly loose product, the salsa, so it doesn't tend to get big, thick air bubbles, but jams or things that are a lot more viscous can get air bubbles sometimes, and it's important to just run around with your plastic tool so you don't chip your jars or scratch them, and just really, release any air bubbles that there might be on the side. That has to do with the food safety, to make sure that there's no pockets where the heat's not penetrating at the same rate. I hope that answered that question. I think, yeah, this should be well boiling. So we've got some time here while those are boiling. I'm wondering, we talked last week a little bit about how to know if your jars have sealed properly. And we've got lots of wonderful pickles around this Open Sky kitchen. I'm going to find a jar of pickles and show you how you can tell if your jar is sealed properly. And we've got a couple questions.
Someone just said on older recipes that's called
knifing, yes. And again, I recommend rather than using a metal knife, just to protect your jars, is use something plastic. So that's why I like this tool a lot. Because these jars are really an investment. I mean, sometimes they will last for decades if you can use these jars for decades. So they're a great investment, so we try to treat them well. Oh, and our magical cameraman has brought us over a jar of dilly beans with a perfect seal on it. So when I press on this, there's no give. The lid has become, I can take off the ring without, it's become slightly concave. Concave? Yeah. When it's not sealed properly, that lid will give. So I can push in and there's movement on the lid. That tells me the jar hasn't sealed properly. So with something like salsa, if I take it out of the canner and after it's cooled, it hasn't sealed properly, I can just put that in the fridge. It won't be shelf stable, but it's still good to eat. But you can't leave it on the shelf for a year, like you can if it's been properly canned and sealed. And that's the color that your pickles turn after a couple weeks waiting. So, are there any other questions? Or maybe
yeah. Where is the best place to store jars?
Best place to store your jars would be away from direct sunlight. So a cupboard or you don't want to store them near your stove or someplace warm like that, or not necessarily near your fridge either, because fridges generate a lot of heat outside the fridge. So a cool cupboard or a darker cupboard where the light's not going to affect the product. So yeah, room temperature is fine. It can be cooler, milder. It doesn't have to be anything too special, but yeah, just away from direct sources of heat. Yeah, usually, unless it specifies otherwise, you can expect about a year out of your canned goods. In terms of quality, the safety is often okay past the year, or usually okay past the year, but sometimes the quality starts to deteriorate. But yeah, pickles and salsas and things and jams should last a year at room temp, if properly canned with a vacuum seal in a water bath canner.
All right. Well, once again, I've got questions for the group. So curious about you guys who are listening in and why you are interested in joining us tonight, why you're interested in canning and, maybe in salsa in particular. So again, feel free to unmute yourself. I love to hear other voices. And it's a chance for us to kind of interact and pretend we're in the same room, even though we're not. So certainly feel free to unmute and let us know why you're interested in canning, or what brought you to this workshop from all across the Maritimes. So we've got Madonna who's saying, I already make a couple salsa recipes, always open to trying new things. Yeah, me too, definitely. I've been making salsa for a while and really curious to see another way of doing it in another recipe. Love salsa on my eggs. Yeah, there's so many ways to use salsa and it's so much better than the grocery store. Right, Elsa? Yeah. So much better. We go through our salsa so fast, even though we do jars and jars and jars and jars of it. We never seem to have enough to last the whole year. Any other reasons why people were interested in spending the evening with us tonight? Bought 3 acres, want to homestead, become more self-sustaining. Definitely. Yeah, do a lot of preserving, but haven't made salsa before. Well, I hope that you will make salsa after watching Mary this evening. Yeah, and I think the interest in homesteading, I totally identify with that. Lots of us out there trying to do more homesteading, whether it's just to be more sustainable, to live off the land because we're interested in being more prepared for the next storm or weather event related to climate change, or now we add the pandemic onto all of that as well. So there's so many different reasons to be canning and be interested in preserving our food. I'll do a shout out for our next and last of our 3 workshops here on preserving food. There'll be one September 12th in the afternoon, and that's going to be on food, on fruit dehydrating with Mary again. I know, I'm so excited. So we have a dehydrator at home that we just got in the winter, and I'm really interested to know what else we can do with it. So if you haven't signed up for that workshop, there's lots of space because we'll be on Zoom again, and feel free to get in touch and learn about dehydrating. Okay, there's so many comments coming in here. I can't read fast enough. 42 plants of tomatoes. Need to find ideas for preserving them. Yes, 42 plants. Woohoo, you'll be making salsa for a while. Okay, so I'm using this workshop to introduce my 17-year-old grandson to preserving. It's so nice, such a great thing to do, and like between the generations, and to learn from our grandparents. And if you don't have grandparents, learn from Mary tonight. Grew hot peppers this year. Just such a great recipe to use them in. That's so cool. What else is scrolling down for me? Oh, there's a question. Oh wait, if the lid doesn't seal, can you process a second time? Homemade pizza sauce. Okay, there's questions for Mary.
You can process the salsa again, but you'll need a new lid. So a fresh one from your jar. Unfortunately, this is one of the things I don't like. But yeah, you can put it through again. You might have some, the vegetables might get a little bit softer in it. I've had jams, for example, where a few jars didn't seal, so I dumped the jam out, reheated it, put it back in the jars, put new lids on and sealed it, and it's fine. Yeah, so you do want your salsa to be hot when you've got it into your jars, because the water bath canning is based on hot materials going into the canner. So if the materials are cold, it's not the same amount of time required to heat them through. So yes, but you should be able to. It works well for things like salsas and jams. Doesn't work so well for pickles. They can get, if you have to recan them, they can get, I think, kind of nasty. They get a little bit softer, but they also store quite well in the fridge for long periods of time because they're very acidic. So, another question. Any tips for making tomato sauce? Yeah, tomato sauce is, I think squeezing out the tomatoes helps. So you don't get all that liquid from inside the tomato, and you get rid of some of the seeds. Because I often find it home canned tomato sauce is kind of thin for my taste. So I like to use that. I like to use the paste tomatoes, so the ones with a thicker, the kind of more pear-shaped ones or the longer ones. Those make a thicker sauce. There's so many different ways of preparing your tomato sauce. But again, nice fresh tomatoes. I like to have them skinned for tomato sauce. I don't like getting that skin in my tomato sauce. It's really important to maintain the right acidity level. So usually in tomato sauce you'll have some vinegar or sometimes lemon juice. If your recipe calls for lemon juice, you need to use a store lemon juice, not a fresh lemon juice, because the lemon juice is in there for the specific purpose of maintaining a certain level of acidity. And with fresh lemons, even though they taste wonderful, there can be a varying levels of acidity, so that can affect the keeping quality of your tomato sauce. I personally like to add a little bit of brown sugar to my tomatoes when I'm making tomato sauce, because I find it balances out the tomato flavor for me, and a little bit of balsamic vinegar, because it kind of adds a sweetness to the tomatoes without being sweet. But those are two things that I pretty much always add to every tomato sauce and every tomato sauce that I make. Could you puree the sauce if you leave the skins on? Yes, I think that's fine. Again, it's really a preference thing. And it's also a patience thing, like what kind of mood are you in today when you're making your sauce. So I think it's perfectly fine to leave it in. And yeah, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily taste bad. It's just different preferences, I think.
Amanda says that's her lazy way.
Yeah, exactly. You know, because sometimes done is better than perfect, right? Like, I mean, in an ideal world, everything we do is perfect and everything's, but in the real world, it's much better to use your produce. You know, it's much better to have your skins on and actually use your produce than to leave it sitting on your counter for 2 weeks until it's moldy, right? Which can happen. Ask me how I know. So yeah, our goal here is to preserve food that has been grown locally and or grown wherever, but it's to have things ready for ourselves to eat and to be shelf stable. So we're not relying on the freezer. So if the power goes out, these foods are still safe. So that's another good reason for keeping a stock of things. I hope that answered the question. Yeah. Yes. Can you add zucchini or other things to salsa? Because everyone's looking for things to do with zucchini. Yeah, you can you could absolutely add different things. We've got some excitement happening behind the scenes here when we mentioned zucchini. Yes, you can add different things. You want to kind of respect the balance a little bit of the recipe. So again, just to make sure you're maintaining the right acidity, but you can add mushrooms, different not to your salsa. That wouldn't taste so good. The one thing about zucchini is it tends to get quite soft and it gets quite mushy. So it may not have the texture that you're anticipating if you add it to your salsa. It doesn't hold up as well. This salsa boiled or simmered for 30 minutes on the stove before we canned it. So zucchini would probably turn to mush, but you can make zucchini pickles and you can process zucchinis. So there are lots of ways you can use it. You can also make zucchini jam, which I made many jars of once, and my kids hated it, but I liked it. So also, yeah. So another good thing about doing smaller batches is with a new recipe is, you know, there's really nothing worse than ending up with 20 jars of something that nobody wants to eat, like the beet jam experiment of 1997. So it's another nice reason why doing a smaller batches can be good. And I've got another question happening over here, so I'm just waiting for that. Yeah, can you dehydrate tomato skins, grind them, and add them to stews? Absolutely. That's a really good use for tomato skins. So if you do peel your tomatoes, you don't have to waste the skins. You can dehydrate them and make a tomato powder that you can add to all kinds of things. You can add it to intensify the tomato flavor in all kinds of things that you're making. So that's a really good way to reduce food waste too. Because yeah, if you're making a lot of sauces and you've got a lot of tomato skins, you can do a lot with those. So that's a really good good point that was made there. Just going to have a look at our timer. How's our? Yeah, we've got about 5 more minutes with the. Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. Mara's my timekeeper. I find some, if you're looking for canning recipes, I would tend to go with reliable sites. Bernard and Cerdo, the agricultural extension offices often have really good recipes that are up to date with the latest science of canning. Sometimes on the internet you can find recipes that have been around for a really long time, but things have changed. And sometimes products have changed too. So for example, vinegars, 100 years ago had different levels of acidity. So there's ingredients that have changed over the years that affects the science of canning. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but okay. So I'm going to hand it over to Amanda, and I'm going to get Mary to mute my sound again. I can talk about that a bit.
Put flour in the salsa.
Okay.
Yeah, Amanda mentioned flour, so in mustard pickles, and a lot of old recipes, like my grandmother's recipe for mustard pickles calls for flour. And flour is no longer recommended as a thickener in pickles. And for example, if I'm selling we have a catering business. If I'm selling my pickles, the health department doesn't actually allow me to do that if flour is the thickening agent. The challenge with flour is the way it thickens the product. It doesn't thicken completely evenly. So sometimes you can get different thicknesses within the product. So the heat doesn't penetrate equally, and that can create areas where there's potential for bacterial growth. So what is suitable for canning is something called clear gel or shore gel. It's a type of cornstarch, a modified cornstarch that holds up to the heat and the length of the heat for canning. Regular cornstarch would it's not strong enough. It doesn't keep the thickness. So clear gel is modified to hold together, and it enables the heat to penetrate equally through the product. So it's starting to be more commonly available. But you can order it online, either through Amazon. There's different suppliers. McCalls.ca is a company in Canada that sells it, and there's a company down in the States whose name I can't remember, but I can send it along afterwards. I order from them sometimes, and it comes I got it in a jar about this big. You can buy it in different size jars. If you're making pie fillings or sauces and things that require thickening, that's what you need to use for food safety. I hope that, and that's something that is new for a lot of people, and it's a good piece, something that was new for me. So.
All right, so I think one more question for this evening while we wait. My last question is, I'm wondering what other kinds of self-sufficiency, self-reliant skills people are interested in learning. What other sorts of workshops or webinars or things that EOS might put on that would help you guys on your quest to increasing your self-sufficiency, sustainability, self-reliant skills. Again, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up, or write a comment in our chat box. And I'm just wondering if, maybe this workshop has sparked your interest, or you've sort of gotten another idea tonight that you're interested in, something else you're curious about, and something else that EOS might be able to help put on in the future. I'm always looking for more ideas and more ways to help out our communities across the region. As I mentioned, we've got a workshop coming up on fruit dehydrating, but you may have lots of other interesting curiosities, and I'm curious to hear. I know last time around at the pickling workshop, there were people interested in spices and vinegars and all sorts of other things. So I've got a good list already, but if there's anything else out there, oh, okay, wait a minute. Oh, okay, it looks like they're ready. Oh, how to make jams and jellies would also be great. Okay, identifying right foraging foods to eat. Yeah, that's definitely come up. So we'll try and do that again. We have put that workshop on and we'll look at doing it again. So I think there's a lot of interest in foraging and wild foods and doing it safely and carefully in our woods and lands. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over. I think that it looks like maybe they are ready.
Right. Our processing's done. This has been simmering for 20 minutes. So I'm going to turn off the heat. And this is a really important step. I'm going to take off the lid. And this just gives the jars a chance to depressurize. So we're going to let them sit for 5 minutes. This is a very heavy canning thing, but I'm going to move it off. If you can safely move it off the heat, you should do so. Ugh. So we're going to let those sit for a bit, for 5 minutes, and that will enable them to depressurize a little bit, so when we take them out, there's less chance of breakage and things can't spill out. So they just sit for 5 minutes, and as soon as that's done, we'll take them out and let them cool to room temperature. Or we'll let them cool. And as they cool, this vacuum seal will start to happen. And you might hear a ping, a nice loud ping sound, and that's always a sound you want to hear after canning. Sometimes it takes longer, but by the time they're cool, they should all have the seal. And I think there's another question. No? Okay. Some other things that are great for canning and that are pretty affordable are chutneys. So there's a lot of really great fruit out this time of year, and if you had a lot of rhubarb, and it's in the freezer, you can make some chutneys with apples and rhubarb that is great, and it's great for Christmas gifts. So lots of different things. So this has been a great opportunity, and I want to take this chance to thank the Province of New Brunswick for the community, the Community Food Action Grant, which enabled EOS to put on these workshops. So it's been a great opportunity for us here at Open Sky, and I hope it's been helpful to you too. And I'm looking forward to doing it again. So it's great to have that funding for initiatives like this, because it's, as we've seen in the past 6 months particularly, it's really important to have for communities to build their food resources and their food resiliency. And we're just going to waiting for those to come out of the jar, and then we're pretty much done. So I'm certainly, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact me after the workshop. I'm always open to answering questions if I can, and if I can't, I will try to find you the answer as best I can and as quickly as I can. You can email me at mary@ketchupwiththat.com. So that's my business name, ketchupwiththat.com. And I will, as I say, I will do my best to answer or find the answer for you. Oh, I can write it down right here, and then I can show you.
I take it in the chat.
Oh, I think Michelle's put it in the chat.
Someone had a question about homemade ketchup. Is that good?
Yeah, there's some good homemade ketchup recipes available. Again, the Bernardin site has a lot of good ones. That's bernardin.com or .ca. I'll send along a list of some resources that Amanda can send to you. And this is my email address if you want to send me an email. Right.
Wait, I'm just getting my pencil. You got 2 minutes.
Okay. I'll just leave it there in case you couldn't find a pencil. That was a helpful tip from Pete. And the reason I had a recipe blog. It's called Ketchup With That, and the reason it's called Ketchup With That is because one of my children would eat ketchup with everything, and she still does. So, and ketchup with everything was taken, So I went with Ketchup With That. And that's why my blog is named what it is. All right, I think we're almost ready here for the great removal. And we're almost, just got a couple minutes left of time. And my burner's hot there, so I'm just gonna, actually all my burners are hot. So I'm gonna take these out with these great tongs. Makes things so much easier, so much better, so much safer. If you're more coordinated than I am. Right. Ah! And you try not to jostle the jars around too much like I've just done and tip them over in the pot, because keeping them upright just helps the seal, helps to ensure that your seal is going to happen. But in real kitchens, everything doesn't always work out perfectly. So I'm just going to put that underneath because this is hot. Yeah. So we've got our jars here, and we're going to wait. Oh, yeah, that would work too. So I'm going to move these apart a little bit. And once they've come out of the canner, the jars will, the lids will be loosened. So they might feel really loose. That's okay. You don't have to tighten them. The role of the rings is just to hold this lid centered on the jar. It's not supposed to. It doesn't hold the seal in. The function of the seal is performed just by the lid. So that's 5 beautiful jars of salsa made with some lovely tomatoes and vegetables from Open Sky. And I think there's one more question. Oh, someone's asking, what can you use chutney for? You can use chutney in all kinds of things. It's great with savory things like cheese and chutney. If spicy foods like dal, like curry dals, and a little bit of chutney on it, it's great. Burgers, if you eat meat, you can have it with. It's great with meat, different types of meat. Yeah, so it's like kind of a spicy sweet condiment. There's lots of different types of chutneys, and yeah, so you can kind of play around with the flavors. And someone's asking if you can use canned diced tomatoes to make salsa. Yes, you can. There are some recipes specifically that you can find that call for diced tomatoes, canned tomatoes, but yeah, absolutely, you can do that. And often, I mean, in the winter, it's usually a better option than trying to find fresh tomatoes, because there usually aren't any that are really good for doing much canning with. Another question. I'm not hearing any pings here. Oh, this one did. Okay. But we'll give them time to cool. Is there a ratio for ingredients for chutney? Chutney's a little bit different. Often it's made with fruit. So the fruit has a high acidity level already. So it's not quite as critical, as it is with pickling, where you're using less acid foods like tomatoes and vegetables. So chutneys there's so many different flavor profiles and different types of chutneys, but often they're already quite acidic, so you don't have to think so much about that particular aspect of food safety. But again, Bernardin is a great source for some great chutney recipes. And again, agricultural extension offices often have really great links to good, reliable recipes for different canned goods. And I think that's it. We're a little bit shorter workshop this time. Thank you for coming. It's been fun. I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime. And enjoy this beautiful time of year. It's a much better time of year to be canning than it was 2 weeks ago, when things were feeling a little bit cooler. So thank you for your time, and it's been great. Have a good night.
Just to echo what Mary said, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Hope you learned lots and that you'll be busy making salsa this weekend. Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Mara.
Bye.
And Michelle and Pete. Good night.
Just go down.